Hello and welcome. Tonight, let's take a slow walk through a world filled not with war or kings or castles, but with colour. The kind of colour that doesn't come from paintbrushes or flowers, but from fire, rot, metal, and time. You're about to enter a forgotten corner of the medieval world, the dye house. This was not a place of beauty. It was a place of smell, of heat, of stains so deep they outlived the garments. A place where people worked not for art, but survival, coaxing vibrant hues out of decay and minerals, soaking cloth in liquids that would make your eyes sting, and standing barefoot in barrels that modern chemical workers wouldn't dare touch. But the result, purple for royalty, crimson for bishops, blue for the banners of armies, was nothing short of power. So tonight, we'll drift through that world together. Slowly, deliberately, we'll explore the life of those who died for colour. Let's begin. You wake to the smell, not of bread, not of wood smoke, but of sour urine, thick dye vapours, and wet wool that hasn't dried properly in 3 days. You are an apprentice in a dye house on the edge of town. You are 13, and your nose already knows this morning will be difficult. The air is damp even before the sun comes up. The dye house is built low, with only narrow vents in the walls. You sleep in the loft above the workroom alongside bales of greasy wool and vats still faintly warm from yesterday's fires. Downstairs, the master is already awake. You can hear the soft, rhythmic slosh of the dye paddles. The big copper pot is going again. The fire is rekindled. It smells like mould and vinegar. You descend the ladder quietly. The main workroom is long and narrow, with stone walls slick with condensation. The main dye vat today, it's the blue one, is suspended above a slow-burning peat fire. It's your job to keep the temperature steady. Too hot and the dye will spoil. Too cold and the colour won't set. You feed peat bricks in carefully. They don't smoke, but they stink. Your hands are already stained, a mottled mix of green, grey and ochre from yesterday. There is no sink, just one wooden tub near the door, filled with water from the stream. The same water everyone washes hands, cloth and occasionally feet in. The stream is dyed purple 2 days a week, red on Thursdays. Next comes the grindwork. You carry heavy jars from the back room. One holds crushed gallnuts, imported at great expense from the east. Another holds stale sheep urine. Yes, real urine. Collected in town by children paid a few coins per bucket. The stronger the smell, the better the fix. There's also madder root red and woad blue. The latter must ferment for days before it's usable. It's your job to stir it. That smell? Like rotten cabbage with a hint of metal. You get used to it, eventually. Kind of. The master tests it with his nose. He's been doing this for 30 years. His nostrils are burned raw. Today, you're dyeing wool. It's already been scoured, scrubbed to remove grease and mordanted with alum, a kind of mineral salt that helps dye stick. The wool is heavy when wet. You load it into the blue vat carefully, using long wooden paddles. The liquid is lukewarm. It stings your hands a bit, but you ignore it. Then you stir, for hours, slowly, methodically. If you miss a rhythm, the dye settles wrong. That could mean a ruined batch, no pay, possibly punishment. Stirred, pause, stirred again. Steam begins to rise. It smells faintly metallic, but also earthy, almost like wet mushrooms, except you know it's the ammonia from the fermentation. You tie a strip of linen across your nose. It barely helps. Your shoulders ache. But no one talks here. The dye house is quiet. There are 5 of you today. 2 apprentices, 1 journeyman, and the master. Everyone works. No one complains. Complaining gets you kicked outside, and outside means you're the one cleaning the urinal barrels later. You'd rather stir. After hours, the first skein is removed. It looks dull at first, almost grey, but as air hits it, something strange happens. Oxygen activates the pigment, and the wool turns blue, slowly, like watching a bruise bloom. Everyone pauses to watch. This is the closest thing to magic you'll see today. The master nods. It's good. You're relieved. You're also hungry. But the food comes later after rinsing. Outside, in the cold daylight, you carry the steaming bundles to a trough. Water rushes from a nearby channel. Your fingers are red from the heat. You scrub each skein by hand, watching as coloured foam snakes away down the ditch. Frogs used to live there. Not anymore. You hang the wool on lines strung between two posts. If it rains, it all has to be done again. So you pray silently, not for blessings, but for dry skies. Lunch is stale bread and onion, sometimes a bit of dried fish. You eat sitting on a wooden stool with purple stains from last week. The journeyman says little. He's missing 2 fingers from boiling mordant vats. He says it like it's nothing. You dip your bread in the cool dye by accident once. You eat it anyway. Later, you watch the master log the batch in a wax tablet. He carves symbols with a bone stylus. Blue, good. 3 bundles. No spoil. Payment due in 4 days. You don't get paid. Apprentices eat and sleep here. That's the deal. 3 years, maybe 5. Then, if you're lucky, you can join a guild. If the fumes don't ruin your lungs first. The fire dies low. The vat's cool. You scrape residue from the copper, careful not to scratch it. The floor is slick. You nearly fall. The master pretends not to see. Outside, the sun is going down. Your arms ache. Your legs tremble. Your hands are stained forever, most likely. Tomorrow is red day. Cochineal and blood. You don't sleep deeply. The stink stays with you. The colour does too. It always does. The records don't name him, not directly, but in the margin of a 14th century account book kept in the south of France, bound in cracked leather, written in a crabbed merchant's Latin, a note appears, inked in faded brown, et purpura mortuus in odoribus, and the purple dyer dead in the fumes, a name lost, but a life still traceable, in threads, in ledgers, and in cloth that outlived its maker. Let us imagine him slowly, carefully, a master dyer of Tyrian purple, a colour once reserved for emperors and bishops, a colour that came not from plants, but from sea creatures, thousands of them, tiny, thorned mollusks scraped from rocks on the Mediterranean coast, crushed, fermented, distilled, the colour of royalty, of death, of poison, and it was his job to produce it. He lived in a modest house near the edge of Avignon, not far from the river. The walls were thick, plastered, and whitewashed, but always faintly discoloured with stains no lime could erase. Purple, faded to sickly grey. He had no wife, few friends. Dyers were not considered clean company, even the masters. They smelled too strongly of what they made. But he had a client list. That was what mattered. Monks, nobles, a cardinal once. Their robes, deep violet, their scarves, blue-black with hints of plum. Each piece was coded in his records, not by name, but by thread count, dye ratio, weight, and delivery date. He was known to be exacting, perhaps even obsessive. In his workroom, which faced the garden where nothing grew, stood the vats, copper-rimmed, lined with hardened residue. The process was precise. He received the shells by boat, packed in damp seaweed. He had them crushed not by hand, but with a heavy millstone he'd commissioned himself. The fragments were boiled with ash, then allowed to steep in a sealed jar for days, weeks if the weather was cool. The odour, he wrote, was acrid enough to peel the soul. That was not hyperbole. His journals, now held in a quiet museum in Arles, describe symptoms: headaches, numbness in the fingers, blurred vision, a burning in the lungs that no balm could soothe. He consulted a healer who prescribed thyme and cool cloths. Neither helped. He continued working. Because the colour worked. When the time came, He would lower the linen or wool into the vat using a curved wooden frame. The solution was dark, nearly black. The fabric emerged pale, greenish, but when exposed to air, it began to shift, first to blue, then to violet, then, if the mix was right, to the deep royal hue that marked the divine and the powerful. He never spoke while this happened. It was, he believed, a form of transmutation. He recorded no prayers, but his silence was ritual enough, and yet the cost was visible. Visitors to the workshop few, as they were described him as gaunt, pale, fingernails stained permanently dark, his eyes rimmed red. He had the cough that many dyers acquired after years of inhaling fumes from alum, copper sulfate, and lye. He claimed it was nothing. He said this for 4 years. Then he collapsed one autumn after stirring the purple vat for too long on a humid day. He did not die then. He recovered, but his left hand never regained full strength. From that point, his apprentice, a quiet young man named Hugo, did the stirring. The master gave instructions from a stool wrapped in a thick wool cloak, even on warm days. The final years of his life are documented mostly through invoices, fewer orders, smaller batches. The purple grew fainter. He may have been cutting the dye, or perhaps the ingredients no longer reached the proper potency. One customer returned a shipment, claiming the colour was unworthy of a bishop. The master refunded it personally. His last recorded commission was for a funerary shroud. The cloth still exists. It is stored in a cedar-lined case beneath the cathedral archive in Aix. The colour has faded, but under certain light it still gleams faintly, like twilight over deep water. He died in his bed, alone. The apprentice found him, surrounded by rags and dye notes. The room smelled, as always, of vinegar, shell, and ash. There was no funeral. Dyers were not buried in church grounds. But Hugo carried out his last instruction to burn the unused vat and seal the workshop. It was never reopened. Years later, the house was torn down. A neighbour noted, in a letter to her cousin, that the soil beneath the floorboards was a strange purple grey, and that nothing would grow there still. The master's legacy lives on not in portraits or statues or books, but in stains, invisible to most, but always there, under the fabric of history. The people who wore his colours are remembered. He is not. But without him, they would have been colourless, and perhaps that is enough. There were whispers in the alleys, not just about the smells or the stains, but about the strange sounds that sometimes came from the dye houses at night, long, low notes, almost like chanting, echoing through stone walls, rising with the steam from the vats. No one admitted to hearing them, at least not out loud, but the women who fetched water from the stream near the Fuller's Quarter would say it quietly, behind gloved hands and beneath linen veils. The dye sings to the dead. Of course it wasn't literal, or perhaps it was, because buried beneath the ritual and routine of dyeing cloth, in the clatter of copper pots and the scraping of pestles against stone, lay a mystery half-spoken and half-remembered of colour, memory, and the sacred. Let us go back, quietly, to a dye house not far from Chartres. The year is 1271. It is dusk. Inside, the fire crackles beneath a set of low-slung kettles. The air is thick with the scent of crushed indigo and damp wool. There are no apprentices here tonight. Only the master, a woman named Isabeau, and her sister, a spinner from the convent. They do not speak. On the table lies a length of undyed linen, freshly washed. Beside it, a bowl not of dye, but of bone ash, mixed with salt and holy water. Isabeau dips her fingers into the mixture and traces a pattern onto the cloth spirals, crosses, a faint symbol of a fish. These are not merchant orders. This cloth is not for sale. It is for burial. Because among the dye houses of the 13th century, Especially in regions where the church's influence was strong but not complete, there lingered older customs folk rituals that predated Rome, predated parchment, predated even the alphabet. Colour was sacred. It marked the living, it wrapped the dead, and some believed it carried memory. In Brittany, records speak of morning blues, a shade of woad-dyed linen reserved only for those who had passed violently. In Provence, a muted violet was mixed with ashes from the family hearth, then used to dye the shroud of a firstborn child. And in parts of Wales, a deep, wine-coloured red was used not just to cover the body, but to trace a path from bed to door, from door to field, from field to the grave, so that the soul would not lose its way. These were not superstitions to those who practiced them. They were continuity. In dye houses like Isabeau's, the act of dyeing was, at times, an act of mourning. The tools were the same, the pots, the paddles, the hands that stirred, but the rhythm changed. The cloth was handled more slowly. The songs low, wordless, were sung only once. No payment was expected. There are fragments of these rituals recorded in the margins of tax logs, in the notes of inquisitors, in the writings of skeptical monks. They speak of dye houses where no coin changed hands during the last quarter moon, where red dye was made without lye, so as not to burn the soul, where bundles of cloth were hung not on racks but laid gently in fields under moonlight, to set the colour with peace. And then there are the jars, discovered beneath the floorboards of an abandoned dye house near the Danube, sealed with wax and etched with crude symbols inside, a mixture of ochre, bone dust, and hair. The archaeologists documented it as a burial pigment. Its purpose is unclear, but the presence of human remains, small fragments within the mix, suggests a connection. Perhaps the dead themselves were mixed into the colour that wrapped them. Perhaps it was a way of keeping them close, of not letting go. Modern scholars debate these claims. Some say the rituals were isolated, rare, confined to fringe communities. Others believe they were more common than the church acknowledged quiet practices that coexisted alongside official rites, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, apprentice to journeyman, woven into the fabric of work itself. What we know is this. In some dye houses, colour was not just a commodity, it was a language spoken when words failed, when grief ran too deep, when the only thing left to do was dip white cloth into the vat, watch it change, and believe, if only for a moment, that something, someone, could be carried forward in hue. And perhaps that's what the whispers meant. Not that the dye sang to the dead, but that it sang of them. And that was enough. The cloth was never just cloth. To a merchant in Bruges, it was a dowry. To a bishop in Florence, a symbol of ecclesiastical rank, and to a petty noble on the Welsh marches, it was a desperate claim to legitimacy, a mantle in deep red that said, without words, "I belong here, I matter," and behind that cloth always was a dyer. But we are not in the dye house today. We are seated instead in a high-backed chair, polished by generations, in the corner of a small, smoke-darkened hall. A wooden tray beside us holds notes, samples, wax seals. We are a patron of dyes. We do not labour, but we decide. And in the Middle Ages, that was its own kind of burden. It is the year 1394. You are a cloth merchant with connections in 3 towns and an eye for colour. Your home smells faintly of cedar and ink. On the walls hang swatches, ribbons in carmine, blue, and golden saffron, each pinned with a code. This morning you expect visitors. You've commissioned a new bolt of woolen cloth for the fall fair, an order of significance, not for sale, but for display. It must be perfect. Not too loud, lest it offend the guild elders. Not too pale, lest it suggest poverty. And so you wait. They arrive at the 3rd hour. 2 journeyman dyers, and their master, a grey-haired woman known only as Dame Ruth. She wears gloves, indoors. The marks of her trade, though hidden, are understood burns, stains, calluses. You greet her with a nod, then motion her toward the table. Out come the samples, a strip of woad-dyed linen, a fine thread of kermes red, imported at cost from Andalusia, and a violet so deep it seems almost black in the shadows of the hall. You touch it gently. It is soft, smooth, but strong. The colour doesn't rub off. Good sign. You begin to ask questions. How long was it soaked? What fixatives were used? Did the wool come from local sheep or imported merino? Dame Ruth answers in clipped, respectful tones. You are her client, yes, but she is not subservient. Her work speaks, in dye, louder than titles. Eventually, you settle on a shade, a warm, earthy orange made from weld and madder, balanced with a touch of iron mordant. Not too bold, not common either. The deal is struck. 2 bolts delivered in 6 weeks. Payment in silver, half now, half upon inspection. You seal it with a wax stamp. The journeymen bow. Dame Ruth simply nods and leaves. Your work continues. As a patron, you monitor not just the cloth, but the politics. The Guild of Dyers and the Merchants' Council do not always agree. If tariffs rise on imported cochineal, you shift to native plants. If there's unrest in the docks and the alum doesn't come in, you delay orders and explain delays to noble clients with carefully worded letters. Your job is colour management, but also people management and status management. Because when the cloth is worn in the square, when the daughter of a baron walks out in your commissioned burgundy cloak, it reflects not just her family name, it reflects yours. And in the medieval world, colour was not aesthetic, it was power, codified in pigment. You remember, some years ago, the near riot in the southern market when a minor noble's son wore scarlet. The hue was too close to that of the bishop's robes. Offence was taken, fines were issued. The cloth merchant responsible lost his stall. He commissioned from a different dyer the next season. You did not. You stayed with Dame Ruth, because hair dyes never ran, because her purple did not fade, even in rain, because she once told you over a cup of weak ale that colour was not just a craft, it was a negotiation between earth and fire, between time and touch, between what was seen and what was meant to be seen. You understood hair, even if you never entered the dye house yourself, even if your hands never held the paddle. Your name is written in the margins of the delivery logs, and that is enough, because cloth fades, but patronage, carefully placed, lasts longer than thread. The door creaks. Inside, it's hot. Not warm like a hearth or the summer sun on the roof tiles. No, this heat is different. It clings to the inside of your mouth. It settles in the folds of your clothes. It lives in the walls. You've entered a dye house specializing in red, specifically cochineal, and before that, madder, and before even that, if you were in Rome or Babylon, perhaps kermes, crushed beetles dried under the sun. But here, in this cramped workshop tucked behind a small courtyard in 15th century Seville, it's cochineal that rules. It begins with the grind. On a low bench, a boy no older than 12 kneels beside a round basalt stone, slowly turning the top wheel. Beneath it, red powder accumulates. Dried female cochineal insects, gathered by hand from cactus pads far across the sea. Each one a pinprick of scarlet. Thousands are needed for a single ounce of dye. The merchant who imports them charges dearly. But the colour? The colour is unmatched. It is not the rust red of madder, nor the wine tone of fermented elderberry. No, this red is alive, vibrant. It glows even in the shadows. The master dyer, whose name is lost to time but whose ledger survives, watches the powder being sifted. He smells it, yes, smells it to test for freshness. Too stale, and the red will fade to pink. Too new, and it might clot in the vat. Once satisfied, he nods. The boy begins heating the mordant. In this case, alum, crushed and boiled in rainwater collected from ceramic jugs on the roof. No well water. The minerals would interfere. The fire is stoked low peat and hardwood. The smell is sharp, clean. It clashes with the sweet, earthy scent of the powdered dye. Elsewhere, the wool is soaked. It has already been scoured, scrubbed of grease and filth using soaproot and, in poorer shops, lye and urine. In some places, the urine is collected from taverns, fermented, a job for those even lower than apprentices. But here, in this house of red, the process is cleaner, not because they are kind, but because red demands purity. Any impurity, an oil smear, a speck of dirt will mar the color permanently. The wool steeps in warm water, then in the alum solution. The timing is critical. The master checks a small bundle tied with twine, dipped in an earlier batch. He unrolls it, wet and steaming. The color is too pale. He frowns. More alum is added, a dash of iron filings, just enough to deepen the tone without blackening it. The cochineal powder is stirred into the vat. The water hisses as it absorbs the dye. Steam rises, red-tinged. It smells how to describe it. Like stone dust and citrus peel, metallic and earthy, alive somehow. The wool goes in next. Slowly, gently. Each skein is turned with long-handled paddles wrapped in cloth to protect hands from the scald. Then the stirring begins. Not wild, not fast, this is not porridge. The motion is circular, measured. 1 beat, 2, 3, pause, lift, check for streaks, return. This continues for hours. The apprentices take turns, their arms shaking. The heat is constant. The color changes first dull pink, then a murky brick, then, at last, the red begins to bloom, like blood, but deeper. Like pomegranate, like lacquered wood. No one speaks. This is the moment of birth. The wool is removed, dripping. It is hung on wooden bars to dry in the covered courtyard. The air is dry. A good day. Rain would ruin everything. In the corner, a small bowl contains the test thread, a single filament boiled beside the main batch. It is wound into a spiral and pressed onto parchment, where its shade will be compared against past records. Consistency is the goal. A noble client in Aragon has ordered 4 bolts of this red. It must match the last shipment exactly. A deviation of even 1 tone could be read as disrespect. The drying wool darkens in the air. The master records the mixture. 4 parts cochineal, 2 alum, 1 water of lime, steeped 8 hours, stirred without cease. He seals the parchment with wax. At dusk, a boy sweeps the floor. Red dust settles in the corners. His fingers are stained. His apron too. He is careful not to breathe deeply. They say cochineal dust can settle in the lungs. One apprentice last year developed a cough he never recovered from. No one mentions it now. The vat is drained. The residue scraped. Saved for cheaper batches or perhaps to dye rope or sacks, anything that doesn't require brilliance. The fire dies. The tools are rinsed. The master places the parchment log beside a row of identical notes, all tied with red ribbon. He does not smile, but he nods just once, satisfied. Tomorrow they will dye silk. A finer hand is needed, a tighter weave, a more delicate bath. But tonight the red hangs heavy in the air. Outside, the sun dips below the rooftops. The alley is quiet, and behind the closed door, the color waits still warm, still singing, still alive. Before there was color, there was cleansing. It may seem mundane, humble even, but the truth is, no dye, no embroidery, no rich weave of wool or linen could shine unless it first passed through the hands of the fuller, and the fuller's hands were never clean. Step carefully now. The floor is slick, stone slabs, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, coated in a thin layer of water and something else. The air smells acrid like vinegar and sweat, undercut by something unmistakably sharp. You're in the fulling workshop. The dye house may get the praise, the vibrant purples and oceanic blues, but the fulling mill is where the real work begins. It is here, in low, hot buildings outside town walls, that raw, greasy cloth becomes fabric fit for kings. It begins with suet, with sweat, with soaproot, and with urine. Yes, urine, collected from the streets, from public jugs, from taverns and bathhouses. The fuller's boy walks the lanes at dawn, calling for chamberlie. It is poured into barrels, then stored until it ferments. A job considered too foul even for a tanner, and yet it is essential, because urine contains ammonia, and ammonia cuts grease better than anything else. The wool that arrives from the loom is thick with lanolin, natural oils from the sheep and dust from the fields. To dye it in this state would be to trap the dirt forever, so it is plunged into the vat. Hot, bubbled, mixed with fuller's earth, a type of clay dug from hillsides and ground to powder and urine. The fuller wears no gloves. Instead, he steps into the vat himself, up to his knees in warmth. A heavy apron over his tunic, hands gripping the cloth, working it back and forth, again and again. The fibers are kneaded, almost massaged. The rhythm is steady, soothing in a way. A song is sometimes sung, not for ritual, but to keep time. Tread in, lift, fold. Tread in, lift, fold. Sometimes the cloth is pounded by hand. In other workshops, a great wooden hammer, driven by water wheel, rises and falls, driven by the current of a diverted stream. Thump, thump, thump. For hours, for days even, the sound echoes across the valley. Inside, the fuller checks for bubbles. When the foam runs clear, the wool is deemed clean. Then comes the rinsing. The cloth is dragged, heavy now, to the rinse pit fresh water, cold and clear. It is swirled, wrung, lifted again and again. The smell fades slightly, but never fully. Fullers were marked by it. You could smell them before you saw them. Their clothes hung stiff with clay residue, their skin often chapped, their fingernails stained, but they were respected. Because without them, cloth remained rough, dirty, useless. Once rinsed, the wool is stretched. Hooks are set into the walls outside the workshop. The cloth is hung on tenterhooks literally to dry flat and evenly, hence the phrase, to be on tenterhooks. You walk the line. Each stretch of cloth is combed, checked, and brushed with teasel heads. A prickly plant, dried and tied into bundles. It lifts the nap, raises the soft surface, makes the fabric smoother. You notice now the quiet. No one speaks in the drying yard. It is a place of focus. Every flaw must be caught before the dyer touches it. A dropped stitch, a tear, a knot in the weave, all are noted, all are marked. Inside, the vats are being drained. The residue flows into the ditch behind the workshop, joining a stream darkened by generations of labour. Nothing grows on its banks, but moss clings to the stones. Life, always, finds a way. The fuller strips his apron. He soaks his feet in a bucket of rainwater. His legs are raw, but his eyes are clear. He knows his work is essential. He knows that the merchants will not praise him, that the guilds rarely mention his name. But he also knows that when the bishop wraps himself in that blue-dyed robe, it will lie smoothly against his skin because of this labour. Silent, unseen, stained but steady. You leave the workshop. The smell clings to your tunic. But for the first time you understand it not as filth, but as foundation, a necessary step between raw and refined, between sheep and splendour, between earth and hue. The stall is bright, too bright. In a market square full of earthy tans and muddy browns, the bolt of cloth laid across the merchant's table seems to shimmer unnaturally green, like new spring leaves, fresh, vivid, impossible. You stop. You're not alone. Others linger, traders, housewives, even a guild official pretending not to look. Everyone is wondering the same thing. How? Because that green, that impossibly rich green, wasn't easy to make. Not legally, at least. You see, in the world of medieval dyes, not all colours were what they seemed, and in the winding alleys between guild rules, import bans and chemical ignorance, there was plenty of room for deceit. You walk closer. The merchant smiles just enough. He's wearing a fine jerkin with too many buttons, the mark of a man who wants to be noticed. His cloth? Labelled as double-dipped verdigris over woad. He claims it was dyed in Bruges. He claims the alum was Venetian. He claims many things, but you've heard otherwise. Let's go back. To the dye house. Not the reputable one near the Guildhall, but a small backroom operation near the tannery. You can smell it before you arrive. Inside, a kettle boils. Not with verdigris. That's too expensive. Instead, copper scraps, scraped from old coins. Simmered with vinegar and a bit of stale wine to accelerate the reaction. It's toxic. The fumes sting the eyes, but it gives the fabric a green sheen. At least for a while. The cloth used isn't high-quality wool either. It's blended wool and flax, maybe even some nettle fibres, which don't take dye well. But it's brushed with alum to fake the sheen, then overdyed with yellow from broom flowers. The green isn't set with proper mordants. It will fade in sunlight, it will stain if wet. Still, it looks good enough for the stall. And most buyers won't know, because dye laws, sumptuary laws, they're called, aren't just about fashion, they're about control. In cities like Florence and Venice, only certain classes could wear specific colours. Royal purples were reserved. Clerical blacks meant something. Even deep blues had to be approved. To fake colour was to fake status. And that made it dangerous, but also profitable. Some dyers became wealthy not through skill, but through imitation. Recipes passed between shady workshops included ingredients like ox bile, rusted nails, spoiled milk, or crushed shells, anything to stretch expensive pigments or simulate rare hues. In 14th century Paris, records show a dyer arrested for selling scarlet wool that bled pink in the rain. In London, a merchant was fined for importing dyed silk from Byzantium under false trade markings. But the biggest cases were harder to prove, because once the cloth was sewn, worn and aged, who could say what colour it was meant to be? The guilds tried to crack down. They created sample books, dyed swatches bound in parchment, stored under lock and key. Inspectors would compare merchant cloth to these samples. If the hue didn't match, the bolt could be seized, the seller fined, or worse named in the public square. Still, tricks continued. Some dyers used smoke drying to darken hues artificially. Others coated cloth with a thin layer of wax mixed with pigment, giving it false richness. In Milan, a technique called damp shading involved rolling wet cloth on coloured wood to absorb the stain. All of it deceptive. All of it effective, at least for a time. You return to the marketplace. The green cloth still lies across the table catching the sun. A boy walks by, dragging a broom. The merchant adjusts a corner of the bolt, making it shimmer just so. You lean closer, smell the faint sourness, see the uneven grain, know the truth. And yet, it's beautiful. Even counterfeit colour has its charm. And in a world where so much is dictated by birth and coin and law, sometimes a little deception is the only way to wear your dreams. You walk on. The merchant calls after you, voice warm with false cheer. 2 L's for a groat, sir. Won't last long. He's right. It won't. But then again, nothing in the market ever truly does. The wind carries the scent before you see the field. It's not unpleasant, not exactly, but it's earthy, damp, like cabbage left out too long, mingled with soil after rain. You crest the hill and there it is, row upon row of thick, bushy plants with low, flat leaves woad. This is not a glamorous life. There are no dyes here yet, no vats or rich bolts of silk, just dirt beneath your boots and a slow ache in your lower back that never really leaves. You are a woad farmer, and if you are lucky, if the season is kind and the rains hold steady but not too long, you might turn those leaves into blue gold. But not yet. First, you harvest. It is dawn. The sun is just breaking over the tree line. The leaves must be picked early, when their chemical strength is highest. You kneel, fingers moving fast and rough. You've done this for years. No gloves. They slow you down. And time matters. The leaves begin to lose potency as soon as they're plucked. They're piled into baskets, hauled into a low building at the edge of the field, part barn, part workshop. Here, the real work begins. First, crushing. The leaves are dumped into large wooden troughs, trampled underfoot. Children sometimes help. Their small feet are good for the corners. It stains them green-blue. The dye will fade from their skin in a few weeks. Sometimes, as the pulp forms, it's scooped and shaped into balls round, heavy, sticky. Then, fermentation. The balls are left to dry partially, then stored in a warm place, often over weeks. The smell deepens, strong, acrid, sharp enough to sting your nose. This is the part most townspeople can't stand. Some villages even ban woad processing within city walls. You understand why. But out here, in the wind and among your own kind, it's just part of life. Once the balls have aged, they're crumbled and soaked again hot water, and sometimes stale urine to catalyze the chemical reaction. The mixture foams, bubbles, the air is thick with the scent. You don't think of it as unpleasant anymore. It smells like work, like money, like survival. You ladle the blue liquid carefully into ceramic jugs. It's unstable now, oxygen will darken it too fast. You cork the jugs, wrap them in cloth, and load them onto carts bound for the dye houses of Rouen, Ghent, York. There, they'll turn your labour into fashion, into status, into something beautiful. But here, back on your farm, the work never ends. The soil is poor after so many plantings. You'll need to rotate crops. You dream of barley, of letting the ground rest. But demand for woad is high this year. A noble wedding, a city guild parade. Word spreads. Orders increase. You plant again. In the evenings, you wash your hands in the stream. They are cracked, darkened in the creases. In the mornings, you chew bread dipped in vinegar. It helps with the smell, they say. Your neighbours are dyers, fullers, spinners. But you are the beginning. No matter how rich the robe, no matter how powerful the man wearing it if it's blue, it started here, in these fields, in your hands, in the smelly, sticky, exhausting labour of the woad farmer. No one thanks you. That's not the point. But late at night, when the wind shifts and carries the smell of dye smoke from the valley below, you close your eyes and smile. That's your colour, your work, your footsteps, still echoing in blue. Collar fades. It's a truth as old as thread. Without something to anchor it, to hold it fast, any hue, no matter how rich, will bleed away. Rain, sweat, the brush of a cloak against a wall. Slowly, invisibly, the pigment disappears. But not if the mordant holds. The dyer knows this, deeply, intimately. It's what separates a masterwork from a wasted bolt. And in the quiet corners of the dye house, among jugs of strange powders and barrels marked with alchemical glyphs, you'll find the secret tools of the trade, the fixers. You step into a storeroom. The light is dim. Only one window, high and narrow, lets in a shaft of sun that glows against the dust. Shelves line the walls. On them, sealed pots and cracked jars, each marked with a symbol. For alum, for iron, for copper, for tin. Mordants, from the Latin mordere, to bite. Because that is what they do. They bite the dye into the fibre, create bridges between pigment and cloth. Invisible chemistry, known by feel and smell and generations of slow learning. Let's begin with the oldest, salt. Plain, coarse, grey salt. Once harvested in pans along the coasts or dug from ancient mines, it was used not for taste but for permanence. Mixed into the dye bath, it softened the wool, helped pigments adhere, not strong enough for every colour, but good for earth tones. Then came alum, powdery white, dry to the touch. A natural sulfate, mined in shards or traded across empires. The Romans used it, so did the Persians. In medieval Europe, it was worth its weight in silver, so much so that kings fought wars over who controlled its supply. You pick up a jar. Inside, granules that gleam faintly, like sugar but bitter on the tongue. Alum was prized for red dyes, madder, cochineal, kermes. It opened the fibre, letting the red soak in deeper, stay longer, burn brighter. But it was tricky. Too much, and the cloth stiffened, too little, and the red washed out in days. Nearby, a darker jar, iron mordant, ferrous sulfate, created by soaking rusty nails in vinegar, cheap, accessible, dangerous. It deepened blues into stormy greys, gave depth to black, but it could weaken the fabric, especially if left too long. An impatient dyer could ruin a whole vat. Then copper, rare, expensive, often used with greens and certain browns. It made colours richer, bolder, but sometimes greenish in unexpected ways. That's the thing about mordants. They're not just fixers. They change the character of the dye. The same pigment, with a different mordant, becomes a new colour entirely. The dyer learns this slowly, over years, by trial, error, whispered tips, and accidents. You turn to the table in the centre of the room. Here lies a dye chart, hand-painted. Faded now, the edges curled, but still readable. A grid rows for pigments, columns for mordants. Each box contains a swatch: blue with alum, sky; blue with iron, thundercloud; red with tin, bright coral; red with alum, brick. Each is labelled in ink, in a hand steady and careful. A record, a legacy, passed down perhaps from master to apprentice, with notes, warnings, corrections. You lift a swatch. Behind it someone has written, "Do not double heat with iron, thread will split." Another reads, "Try tin plus alum, but soak overnight, better tone." The science is imprecise. There are no labs, no formulas, no thermometers, only smell, feel, instinct. The dyer tests by dipping fingernails, watching how skin stains, by boiling split threads and seeing which end holds colour longer, by trusting. Even now, centuries later, cloths dyed this way still retain hue, found in bogs, in crypts, under the timbers of sunken ships, colours still clinging, held fast by ancient salts and unknown hands. You walk back toward the light. Outside, someone is boiling wool. You smell the sharpness of vinegar and iron. You know that moment is coming. The dip, the fix, the commitment. Once the mordant goes in, the path is set. The colour will hold or not. But the dyer never skips it, because a dye without mordant is like a song without memory. It fades too fast, and in a world that forgets so easily, something must hold. The workshop is quiet, but never empty. Even in the deep hours before dawn, before the hearths are stoked and the vats begin to bubble, someone is always here, sweeping, measuring, watching. Because this is not just a dye house. It is a guild workshop, and that changes everything. Guilds are not simply trade unions, not in the medieval sense. They are fortresses of knowledge, of tradition, of power. They regulate not just what is made, but how, when, by whom, and in what quantity. Every bolt of cloth, every scrap of thread, carries the weight of reputation, and behind that, a web of relationships stretching across cities, nations, generations. You step inside. A large wooden board leans against the back wall. Carved into its surface are dozens of marks, some familiar, others strange. These are the signatures of the dyers permitted to work under this guild's authority. Each symbol represents a family, a lineage, an oath sworn. To be born into a dyer's household is to inherit more than a trade. It is to be entrusted with secrets. You hear the door shut softly behind you. Someone enters, a journeyman perhaps, or a trusted apprentice. He bows his head slightly toward the board, then begins mixing ingredients in silence. No instruction is needed. He's learned this routine since childhood, through repetition, not books, because books don't exist here. Not really. There may be ledgers, lists of clients, weights of wool, prices for indigo, but the formulas, the true recipes, are oral, spoken only in hushed tones, shared only at the proper time, often not even written down until an apprentice is ready to become master. Why? Because colour is power. To control a specific shade, say, the exact depth of a blue favoured by a duke's household, is to control trade. If others can't replicate it, you hold the market. If they try and fail, their cloth fades and your reputation grows. This is not mere vanity. This is survival. You approach a locked cabinet. Inside, wax tablets, scraps of dyed fibre, annotated swatches, a page that reads, "Formula for King's Shadow, add gallnut infusion, steep in ash water." No full explanation, only fragments. Enough to trigger memory. Not all secrets are chemical. Some are political. You learn, for example, which merchants prefer fast delivery over perfection, which noble families will pay more for silk than wool, but only if the silk is foreign, which inspectors are strict and which can be persuaded. You learn the invisible calendar of the guild. When inspections happen, when the masters meet, when new apprentices are accepted, that last one is especially complex. Patronage matters, so does bloodline. If your grandfather broke a guild rule even decades ago, it may still affect your acceptance today. You sit at a long table with carved legs. Overhead, a faded tapestry shows the patron saint of dyers, Saint Homobonus, or perhaps Saint Maurice, depending on the region. The saint holds a bolt of cloth, perfectly straight, unblemished. An impossible standard. You run your hand across the wood. There are grooves where others have sat, worn down by elbows, fingertips, sleepless nights. Here, decisions were made whether to censure a member for inferior colour, whether to share a new mordant formula with allied cities, whether to ban an outsider's cloth entirely. You think about the dyers who operate outside the guild, the ones who sell cheaper, faster, unlicensed. Their colours fade, their cloth rots, but for a poor buyer, it may be all they can afford. The guild calls them counterfeiters, but sometimes they are simply desperate. You leave the table and approach a stained glass window, rare for a workshop. The light through it is blue, gold, green, a quiet reminder of what's at stake. A colour is never just a colour. It is a signature, a shield, a secret. And in this place, guarded by laws and loyalty and generations of unspoken rules, it is a mirror, reflecting who you are allowed to be. The fire never goes out. Not truly. Even when the dye house shutters for the night, when the apprentices roll themselves in cloaks and curl near the corners to sleep, a few coals are always left smouldering under the iron stove. Because in this place, heat is not merely a convenience. It is the very heart of transformation. You sit near the hearth. The air is heavy, not just from smoke, but from moisture. Steam clings to the rafters. Every stone wall seems to sweat. Somewhere in the room, water bubbles in a large copper cauldron, its surface quivering with tension. From time to time, a burble breaks through, soft, deliberate, rhythmic. There is no rush here, because heat must be patient. The master dyer approaches the fire. He says nothing, but you hear the crack of resin as he feeds a new log into the flame. It catches slowly, then flares. Shadows leap across the workshop, illuminating racks of drying cloth and rows of hanging herbs. Woad, madder, weld, saffron, all of them need heat, but never too much. Too hot, and the color turns. Too cool, and it never takes. The dyer squints at the cauldron. He does not use a thermometer. There is no mercury glass, no calibrated dial. Instead, he dips a wooden spoon into the water and touches a drop to the inside of his wrist. He nods, just right. Then, the process begins. He lifts a cloth bundle, rough wool, pre-soaked in alum, and lowers it slowly into the dye bath. The color today is a strange purplish red, brewed from madder roots soaked and crushed over 2 days. It needs to be heated slowly, never boiling. Too much aggression, and the red will shift orange. Too little, and it turns brown. You watch as he stirs gently. The cloth turns, submerges, lifts again. The dye begins to stain it unevenly at first, but over the next hour it darkens, richens, deepens. Heat, in dye work, is not just for blending, it is for unlocking. Pigments are often dormant until warmed, trapped in plant cells or bound to tannins that require coaxing. Some require fermentation first, others must be shock heated. Every color has a mood, every fiber a different appetite. Linen, for example, needs more heat than wool. Silk, delicate as a whisper, demands lower temperatures but longer exposure. And cotton, rare in Europe at this time, requires boiling mordants just to hold a tint. The dyer adjusts the flame. He uses not just logs but specific wood. Applewood gives a slow burn, oak, longer. Pine flares too quickly but is useful for kindling. In some places, dung is dried and burned for an even, low heat that doesn't smoke. You notice something else now. Bones. A small jar on a nearby shelf holds powdered bone, usually from sheep or oxen. Boiled and dried, ground to a fine ash, it is added to certain dye baths to fix blues and purples. The calcium changes the pH, making the dye less acidic and more permanent. A secret learned by accident, perhaps, when someone once boiled cloth in a pot reused from cooking. Even blood was used, sometimes. Not for the colour, but for the iron in it. Farmers would bleed animals, collect the iron-rich fluid, and mix it with vinegar to create a mordant for dark reds and greys, grim perhaps. But practical. In the dye house, nothing is wasted. You lean closer to the cauldron. The colour is almost ready. The master lifts the cloth, holds it in the steam. The hue is uneven, but that will settle once cooled. He hangs it on a wooden rack, smoke curling beneath, and now the fire must be fed again. Always the fire. You realize that dyeing is not an act of painting. It is not like brushing color onto canvas. It is a negotiation between heat, time, chemistry, and patience. You never truly control the color. You encourage it, invite it, hope that it stays. And if the heat is wrong, the color runs, or worse, it hides. Buried within the fibers, dull, lost, unfixable, you sit back. The hearth crackles softly. The coals dim slightly as the door creaks open, letting in a gust of night air. Someone enters carrying a new bundle of wool. Still damp, still raw, still waiting for its transformation. The fire is ready, and tomorrow it begins again. The sky is not cooperating today. Clouds hang low over the rooftops, thick with an iron-grey stillness. You smell rain before it arrives, a faint sharpness in the air, the way stone smells when it's about to turn slick. And for the dyer, this is more than a nuisance. It's a delay. It's a threat. It's a chemical complication wrapped in weather. You pull your cloak tighter and step through the dye house gate. The yard is quiet. No steaming vats. No cloth stretched out to dry. Just the drip of last night's rain collecting in barrels, and the distant sound of fabric flapping limp on a wooden rack. Because dyeing, real dyeing, is a game of moisture. Too much and everything sours. Too little and the dyes won't dissolve. And worst of all, when the rains come heavy and long as they often do in spring, it becomes a race against mildew, mold and rot. You enter the dye hall. It smells wrong. Not awful, not yet, but off. The sour tang of improperly dried cloth, a dampness clinging to the beams overhead. Someone's hung a sprig of lavender on a nail more out of superstition than effect, but it can't cover the truth. Yesterday's wool wasn't brought in fast enough. Now it's ruined. The apprentice stands beside it, eyes low, hands trembling. He'll be reprimanded. Not harshly. Everyone knows it happens. The weather shifts quickly. A single cloudburst can ruin 10 days' work. Because in dyeing, water is never neutral. It carries minerals, sediment, taste. The dye master insists on drawing from a specific stream a few miles away because it's soft water, low in iron. Wells in town are too heavy. They dull the madder, sour the indigo. And rainwater? Rainwater is unpredictable. It collects soot from the air, especially in cities with chimneys. In coastal towns, it brings salt. It changes pH levels subtly, but enough to turn a bright yellow into dull ochre or a sky blue into swamp. So they collect it carefully, in open barrels, lined with cloth, filtered with charcoal and eggshells. Some dye houses even use sand pits to let water seep through slowly before capturing it. The most cautious dyers wait 3 days after a rain before restarting their vats just to be safe. You walk through the rinsing room. Here, cloth is soaked post-dye to remove residue. The basins are filled with yesterday's water, reused to save cost. But that means it's cloudy, tinted, heavy with dissolved mordants. The dyer tastes it not a gulp, just a drop on the tongue, enough to tell if it's still usable. Today, he spits and pours it out. Better to lose the water than stain the cloth. Outside, the rain begins. A slow patter on the roof. A puddle grows near the steps. The dye master closes the shutters. He says nothing, but his shoulders stiffen. He knows they're behind schedule. A merchant from Bruges is expecting a shipment by week's end. Deep greens, 6Ls each, properly set. But if the humidity stays, if the wind turns, if the water refuses to cooperate, you glance at the drying racks. They've been pulled inside, angled near the hearth, but that introduces another risk: uneven drying. Too fast on one side, too slow on the other. It warps the thread tension. The cloth shrinks oddly. Clients notice. A good dye is only half the work. The other half is managing moisture. And moisture in this world is as much fate as craft. You listen to the rain. It's heavier now. The roof tiles echo with it. Someone lights another fire, not for dyeing, but just to keep the air dry. Old rags are hung above the flames. A thick bolt of wool is carefully laid on a slatted bench to air, not touch the ground. Everything is controlled. Everything is precarious. You begin to understand the quiet anxiety behind the dyer's calm face. It's not the fire, or the mixing, or even the pigments that cause the most worry. It's the weather, the unstoppable, uncontrollable weather. In a world before climate control, before sealed buildings and dehumidifiers and indoor plumbing, colour is hostage to the rain. You open your palm, catch a few drops. You smell them. Even now, they carry the scent of soot and earth and something faintly metallic. You step back inside, close the door gently, and the waiting begins again. It begins long before colour touches fibre, before the cauldron is lit, before the mordant is stirred, before the dye house even stirs with morning footsteps. The work of dyeing begins not with pigment, but with preparation, because cloth is stubborn. It resists, and if you do not coax it first gently, thoroughly, and with respect, it will never take the dye. You stand in a side chamber of the dye house, smaller than the main hall, but filled with activity of a quieter sort. There's no vibrant hue here, no bubbling baths, just pale fabric, hung in long sheets from beams overhead, drying after its first wash. Raw wool cloth, undyed, unshaped, unfinished. It comes in rolls, rough and stiff, still smelling faintly of sheep and lanolin. Some are softer, better processed by fullers. Others are coarse, thick with oils. Either way, the dyer cannot begin until the cloth is ready to receive. So it is scoured. You watch as a journeyman kneels beside a large wooden basin. He lowers a bolt of wool into the warm water, already murky from repeated use. In the water, lye made from ashes and rainwater. Sometimes stale urine is added, for the ammonia. It's not pleasant, but it works. The journeyman rubs the cloth against itself, over and over. There are no soaps, no commercial detergents. The cleansing is manual pressing, folding, kneading, lifting. The goal is to strip the fabric of its oils. Natural lanolin, left in the wool for spinning, now must be removed. If it remains, it creates a barrier keeping dye from penetrating, from bonding. The cloth is rinsed in cool water. Then again, and again, until the journeyman is satisfied or until his hands cramp, whichever comes first. Only then is it hung to dry, but not in sunlight. Never sunlight. Sun bleaches and weakens. It must be shade-dried, in open air, gently swaying like pale ghosts above the courtyard. The cloth stiffens as it dries. That's normal. It will soften again once wet. In the next room, another apprentice prepares linen. Linen is trickier than wool. It's made from flax plant fibre, not animal. It behaves differently. It's less absorbent, more brittle, prone to staining. It must be boiled, then pounded, then rinsed in alum-infused water before it can even see a dye bath. She handles it carefully. Too much agitation, and the fibres fray. She checks the threads per inch with a small wooden comb. Consistency matters. Uneven weave means uneven colour. A tight section might emerge darker, a loose one paler. Every imperfection becomes visible once the dye strikes. You walk past a table covered in small swatches. Each is pinned to parchment. A note beside them reads, Wool lye scoured X2, Linen Urinesoak rinsed Dreichs, silk untouched. These are test samples. The dyer will dip them later, comparing how preparation methods change the final tone. Sometimes a customer wants a brighter red, sometimes a deeper blue. Often, it's not the dye that changes, but how the cloth was readied. You look toward a locked cupboard in the back. Inside, silk. Imported from afar, fragile and precious. It requires special care. No harsh lye, no rough kneading, only warm water, a few drops of vinegar, and hands so gentle they barely disturb the weave. It is pre-soaked, pre-stretched, pre-warmed. Because silk is temperamental and expensive. You return to the wool. The journeyman now brushes it with a stiff broom, removing stray fibres. He checks the edges for fraying, trimming loose threads. He marks the corners with chalk, a subtle symbol only the workshop recognizes. It tracks the bolt's path through the process. Who scoured it? Who dyed it? When? It's a quiet system, but effective. You realize, watching him work, that the color, the final, showy, outward face of the cloth is only the last act of a long play. Behind it lies hours of washing, rinsing, drying, brushing, boiling, stretching, testing, checking, and all before a single drop of pigment is used. You glance at your own sleeve. It's blue, a deep, warm blue. You wonder now what it took to make it that way. What steps preceded the color? What hands touched it? What water it met? What fire warmed it? What fibers it once was, long before it became clothing. And you understand. Dyeing is not about painting color onto cloth. It is about convincing the cloth thread by thread to remember. The day ends for most of the town when the sun dips behind the walls. Shops close, bakers bank their ovens, streets grow quiet except for the distant clatter of hooves or the soft voices of watchmen. But here, inside the dye house, the day doesn't end with sunset. It shifts. Night work begins. You step through the doorway, the wood warm to the touch from the heat of the vats inside. The air is different at night, thicker, almost sleepy. Steam hangs lower, unable to escape through the roof vents now that the cooler air presses down. An apprentice nods at you. His face is streaked with sweat and soot. He doesn't speak. No one does much at night. Voices carry strangely in this enclosed, humid world. It feels wrong to break the rhythm. The master sits by the fire. He's older, his beard tinged white, but his hands are steady. He watches the coals, occasionally adjusting them with an iron poker. In the dim light, his eyes catch the glow, reflecting like polished copper. It is his job tonight not to stir or scrub, but simply to maintain. Dye baths cannot cool too fast. Some must steep overnight. And so he watches. You move past the racks. Wool hangs in heavy bundles, dripping into wooden troughs. Each skein glistens in the faint firelight, colours deepening as they dry. Shadows weave through them like a forest of cloth and vapour. The night crew works slower. There's no rush, no shouting, no chatter. Just the slow, measured motion of paddles turning cloth and the occasional hiss when a log is added to the fire. You hear water drip. A soft splash as someone rinses a hand in the tub. A creak of wood as a bench shifts under weight. It is strangely soothing, almost like watching waves on a quiet shore. The air smells stronger now. Heat and stillness concentrate everything, the earthy tang of madder, the metallic bite of alum, the faint rot of fermenting woad. It's pungent but oddly calming, like incense in a temple you don't quite understand. You sit near the doorway, watching. An apprentice climbs a ladder to check the silk drying above. He moves carefully, as if the threads might whisper complaints if disturbed. Each piece is spread out on thin rods, not touching, not twisting. He checks the edges for pooling dye, smoothing them gently with a wooden stick. Then he descends, barefoot, silent. Night in the dye house has its own rituals. Before midnight, the journeyman brings a pot of water to the hearth, not for dyeing but for tea, an herbal brew of thyme and dried rose hips. It cuts the harshness of the fumes, helps clear the chest. He ladles some into small clay cups, offers it without a word. You take one, sip. It's bitter, but warm. The master leans forward now. The coals are shifting, the heat dropping too quickly. He signals to add more fuel. The fire flares briefly, painting the room in a sudden burst of gold. For a moment, you see everything clearly. The damp floor, the worn tools, the sheen of sweat on the apprentice's arms. And then it fades back into shadow. The quiet returns. Night work is not glamorous. No clients come by, no guild inspectors, no noble women asking for samples. Just the slow, necessary maintenance that ensures tomorrow's colours will be even, lasting, worthy of coin. It is work done for the sake of craft, not recognition. Outside, the town sleeps. You imagine the dark streets, the closed shutters, the dogs curled near hearths. Here, the dye house feels like a world apart, timeless, suspended, breathing in its own rhythm. Steam curls around your face. You exhale slowly. Somewhere in the rafters, a drop of condensation falls, pattering against the stone floor. The master rises, stretches his back, and begins to hum a low, tuneless sound. Not a song, but a presence. It fills the silence, wraps around the steam, and blends with the hiss of the fire. The apprentices pick up the hum, softly. It's not music, not really. Just sound to mark the hours. Just sound to remind each other they are still awake. The night stretches on. The fire keeps burning, and the dye, in its slow, secret way, deepens under the watchful dark. Before the dye, before the first whisper of colour kisses the cloth, before the pot boils or the fire crackles or the master nods, there must be mordant, a word that sounds faintly like murder. And perhaps to the apprentice tasked with preparing it, the process feels no less perilous. You stand near a wooden bench. On it are several small jugs, each sealed with wax or cork. None are labelled. Labels would be pointless in a dye house where literacy is rare. Instead, each vessel has a mark, a carved notch, a bit of twine, a wax seal pressed with a different emblem. You know them by smell, and you will come to know them by sting. Alum, copperas, tannin, iron, tin, mordants. They are not dyes, and yet without them, the dye is nothing. They fix the colour to the fibre, bond it, anchor it, force it to stay. Without a mordant, cloth soaked in the richest hue will bleed in the first rain. One wash, and it fades like a memory. So mordants are essential, but they are also finicky. You lift the lid of the first pot. Alum. It sparkles faintly, like crushed glass. Mined from rocks purified in the fire, dissolved in boiling water. It smells clean, astringent, safe. It is the most common mordant, especially for bright colours, yellows, reds, and some blues. But its preparation is tedious. Too little, and the colour won't take. Too much, and the cloth stiffens, chalky to the touch. The master dyer adds a pinch to a bucket of hot water, stirs with a rod, and lowers a skein of wool. He moves slowly, gently pushing the yarn beneath the surface. This is not the time for boiling. Mordants work best when warm, but not scalding. Next comes iron, a darker jar. The liquid inside smells metallic, sour. Iron mordant is made by soaking rusted nails in vinegar, often for weeks. It creates a greyish solution that deepens colours, turns bright red into burgundy, yellow into olive, green into near black. But it weakens the cloth. Too much, and the fibres turn brittle, prone to tearing. Still, it is beloved, especially by poorer dye houses who stretch weak pigments by turning them darker. A trick, perhaps, but a clever one. You peek into the copperas pot. Green crystals, vibrant as moss, dissolve into a sour liquid that smells of rain and rot. Copper mordant used sparingly, for deep greens and teals, dangerous in high doses. It eats through skin. Some dyers lose feeling in their fingertips after years of handling it. The apprentices wear rags on their hands. Not gloves, just rags. Cheap, replaceable, already stained beyond recognition. Then there's tannin. Found in oak galls, bark, certain leaves. It's used mostly on plant fibres like linen. Animal fibres, wool, silk don't need it as much. But for cotton or flax, tannin helps bridge the bond between fibre and dye. It smells faintly of tea. It's gentler, safer. Often the apprentice's favourite. You observe quietly as the dyer mixes several together. Not all mordants are used alone. In fact, most colours require a cocktail. Alum with tannin, iron with vinegar, a bit of copper stirred into the final rinse. The recipes are guarded, passed from master to apprentice, changed slowly over time like family heirlooms. One master prefers a triple mordant alum, then iron, then a wash-in whey. Another insists on aging his alum solution for 3 days in the sun. Some even believe the phase of the moon affects the potency. Superstition? Perhaps. But in an age where results matter more than reasons, no one questions the method if it works. You feel the weight of the process now. The mordants are invisible on the cloth. No one sees them. No one praises them. Yet, without them, the colour is a ghost. Fleeting, false. The dyer removes a skein from the alum bath. It looks unchanged, but it's different now. It's ready. In the dye house, colour is currency. Not just in the sense of trade and cloth, but in the deeper, more precarious sense of power, protection, and pride. To understand the world behind the vats and vats of woad, you must look beyond the steam and into the books, the ledgers, the quiet conversations behind closed doors, because dyeing is not just a craft, it is a business, and, like all businesses in the medieval world, it is ruled by guilds. You sit on a stool near the master's table. He has a ledger open, not a printed book, but pages sewn together, written in a careful, upright script. Names, dates, weights, customers, payments, deliveries. At the top, a stamp, the sigil of the Dyers Guild. The guild oversees everything. Who may dye, what may be dyed, which colours are permitted for whom. In some towns, only guild members may work in certain colours. Crimson, reserved for royalty or clergy. Deep blue, allowed only if the proper dues are paid. To operate outside the guild is risky. Fines, harassment, even exile from the town. But to join the guild is not simple. You must be apprenticed, then serve as a journeyman, then present a masterwork, a piece of dyeing so perfect, so consistent, that it proves your worth. The colours must be true, the cloth even, the mordant flawless, and even then, you may be rejected if the guildmaster dislikes you. It's a small world, tightly guarded. Secrets are part of the currency. Recipes are not shared freely. Each workshop has its own variations: how long to ferment the indigo, how many days to soak the madder root, which woods burn the cleanest. Apprentices are sworn to silence. Journeymen risk their future if they whisper too much while drinking. There are stories, always stories, of a rival dye house stealing a formula, or of a disgruntled apprentice selling his master's method to another town. And there are consequences. You hear of one dyer whose cloth turned unexpectedly brown after a rival poured copper shavings into his rinse water. Nothing could be proven, but the guild whispered. The rival left town soon after. Then there's the economics of the dye itself. The raw materials must be bought or grown, woad, cultivated in special fields, madder root, slow to grow, finicky to harvest. Imported cochineal from Spain or indigo from far abroad, expensive and dangerous to acquire. Each pigment must be priced by weight, quality, and freshness. Clients, often merchants, haggle, demand samples, delay payments. Some ask for unnatural colours, lemon yellow in winter, indigo in spring. The dye master must smile and nod, knowing it may not be possible, but that to say so outright risks losing business. You flip a page in the ledger. You see a note beside one customer's name, always short by a groat. Another prefers madder over cochineal, cheaper, says it lasts better. Another, aristocrat, add extra alum for deeper hue. The margins hold secrets. The dye master glances at you. He says nothing, but he knows what you're reading. He knows that running a dye house is more than boiling water and stirring pigment. It's negotiation. It's survival. It's guarding your knowledge like a dragon guards gold. Because colour fades, but reputation sets, like a good mordant. At first glance, it's nothing special. A squat green plant, short leaves, grows in weedy clusters along stone walls and old pastures. To the untrained eye, woad is just another bit of greenery, unremarkable, ordinary. But to the dyer, it is treasure, because hidden within those waxy leaves is a rare kind of magic. Blue, not just any blue, a soft, smoky, earthy blue, the kind that clings to wool and linen like shadow to twilight. But unlike other dyes, you cannot simply boil woad in water and dip your cloth. Number. You must coax the colour out, gently, slowly. Fermentation is the key, and the process is strange. You arrive in the dye yard just after dawn. The pits are already steaming. Long, low stone vats, each covered with a wooden lid to trap the warmth. A pungent smell rises from them, part vegetal, part sour, part unnameable. The apprentices are busy. They stir the pits with long paddles, their faces twisted into masks of endurance. The odor is strong, stronger than vinegar, stronger than any spice. It clings to hair, to skin, to your teeth even. But they are used to it. You peer inside a fart. The liquid is greenish-yellow, with a thin layer of bubbles forming at the edges. No sign of blue, none at all. And yet, you are told, this is how it begins. The leaves were harvested 3 days ago. They were crushed underfoot, literally by bare feet, in a process called woad treading. Crushed, pulped, left to rot, mixed with urine or stale water, sometimes even dung. Then packed into balls, dried, ground again into powder. All of this just to prepare the pigment. Now, the powdered woad is soaking, fermenting in the warm vats, encouraged by the fire that burns slowly beneath the stones. The fermentation creates an alkaline soup, a strange brew where oxygen must be carefully managed. The dyer checks the temperature. Too cool, and the vat dies. Too hot, and the color never forms. A balance must be kept. The apprentices add lime-crushed chalky rock to help maintain the alkaline balance. And now they wait. Several hours pass. Nothing seems to change. But then, with a stir, the surface glimmers just a hint of iridescent sheen. Like oil on water, a whisper of the blue to come. The dyer lifts a cloth dipped moments before. It comes out yellowish-green. But wait, as the cloth is exposed to air, something remarkable happens. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it begins to shift. Green turns turquoise, then a dusty indigo, then, finally, that unmistakable woad blue. The transformation is silent, but electric. You watch it again. Another skein, another shimmer. The reaction happens not in the vat, but in the air. The oxygen fixes the dye, changes it chemically. The cloth is then rinsed, hung to dry, and the color is set. You can't help but marvel. All that work, all that stink, the fermentation, the lime, the careful balance just for this moment. And still, the woad dyer's job isn't done. Each vat must be fed again. Woad is a living vat. It must be tended like a garden, like a child. Left unfed, it goes sour. Fed too much, it overheats. Some dyers name their vats. They keep them alive for weeks, even months. A healthy vat yields consistent color. A sick vat? A nightmare. No two vats behave the same. Even if the ingredients are identical, there's something organic about it all. Something intuitive. Apprentices are taught to listen, to smell, to sense. Science is not what drives this. Experience is. You sit back and breathe through your mouth. The smell is stronger now. The fire's been fed, and the vats bubble gently. A journeyman approaches with a logbook. Inside, small sketches of each vat notes beside them. Vat 3 sluggish, fed with mash on Wednesday. Vat 5 gave uneven tone, lime reduced. Vat 7 good for linen, poor for silk. You realize the dye house is not just a factory. It is a laboratory. And woad, in all its humble, smelly glory, is its most complicated subject. You look again at the cloth now hanging in the shadows. Blue, soft, alive, and behind it, a process older than history, equal parts science and sorcery, hidden in a common leaf and nurtured in rot and fire. You don't think of the dye house as a place of fire. Steam, yes, water certainly, bubbles, cloth and colour. But beneath it all, beneath every rich indigo, every brilliant red, there is a flame, controlled, watched, coaxed like a living thing, and without it the dye would fail. You step outside to the backyard, behind the stone walls of the workshop. There, in a half-covered lean-to, stands the kiln. It's not large, no chimney, no grand bellows, just a dome of packed clay and brick, wide at the base, narrowing toward the top. Its belly is blackened with soot. A shallow pile of chopped wood rests beside it, elm, beech, sometimes willow when the wind blows from the north. The fire has been burning for hours, not a raging inferno, That would spoil everything. The kiln must stay steady, gentle. A low, constant heat to warm the vats without boiling them, to dry the pigment blocks without cracking, to age the mordants without killing their bite. The apprentice on fire duty wears a leather apron and a thick cloth across his nose and mouth, not for protection from the flames, but from the ash. It rises in gusts whenever the kiln's door is opened, tiny flecks of black that cling to your skin like whispers. He opens the side panel. You peer in. Orange embers glow like sleeping eyes. A low, rhythmic pulse. He adjusts the logs with a long iron hook, then closes the door again. Not too much air. Air makes it flare. And flare makes it surge. And surge makes the dye uneven. This is not a blacksmith's fire. This is a dyer's fire. Elsewhere, small clay bowls rest on shelves above the kiln, each filled with substances meant to warm slowly. Crushed gallnuts for tannin, lime paste for scouring, and tiny blocks of dried indigo waiting to be powdered. On the far side of the yard is the ash pit. It smells bitter, like burnt hay, vinegar, and damp moss. Ash is not waste here. It's collected, sifted, reused. The finest ash is stirred into mordants to help them adhere. Some is mixed with urine to clean cloth. Even the gritty remains are sometimes spread in the fields as fertilizer. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is quick. The fire demands patience. You learn that the dye house has rhythms built not just on color but on flame. The master dyer wakes before dawn to check the coals. Even on feast days, someone must watch the fire. A dye house with a dead kiln is a dead business. You remember stories told at the back of the hall of apprentices punished for letting the heat drop, of a journeyman dismissed after letting a whole batch of crimson turn dull from a sputtering vat. Collar doesn't forgive. Fire doesn't forget. You feel the warmth on your face now. It's comforting in the early chill, but it carries weight, responsibility. You wonder how many of the rich robes worn in distant cities owe their color not to rare ingredients or secret formulas, but to this quiet, smoky flame, tended carefully in the early hours by hands like these. Hands like yours. You pick up a log and feed it into the mouth of the kiln. The fire accepts it with a sigh, and the dye house lives another day. It begins in the field. Long before the cloth is dyed, before it hangs in damp skeins or is folded into bolts of royal crimson or merchant blue, linen begins as flax, a plant, slender, pale green, waving softly in the breeze like hair under water. You walk through a flax field in early summer. The plants are knee-high, almost ready. They must be harvested at just the right time when the stalks are firm, but the seeds not yet dry. Too soon and the fibers are weak. Too late and they turn coarse, brittle. Timing matters. The harvest is done by hand. You grasp each plant at the base and pull it from the ground, roots and all. Cutting is not allowed, it damages the fiber. The roots must stay intact. The plants are bundled and laid to dry in long rows, golden in the sun. Then comes retting. You soak the bundles in stagnant water ponds, ditches, or special tanks dug for the purpose. Retting separates the fibers from the woody core through controlled rot. It smells, as you might expect, dank, sour, heavy. The water grows cloudy. Skin itches after handling. The bundles are turned often. Too short a soak, and the fibers won't separate. Too long, and they disintegrate. It is once again a matter of feel, of patience. You retrieve the flax from the water, now darker, limp. It's dried again. Then comes breaking. The bundles are fed between wooden blades or beaten with mallets, cracking the woody stalks. Dust fills the air, a fine greyish powder that clings to your nose, your clothes. You cough. Everyone coughs. After breaking comes scutching. You hold a stalk against a vertical board and scrape it with a dull wooden knife, removing the broken core and freeing the fibers. It takes rhythm, not strength. Then heckling. The fibers are drawn through a series of iron combs, each finer than the last. The combs tug and straighten, removing impurities and aligning the strands. The result is a bundle of pale golden threads, soft and silky, almost like hair. You twist them into yarn, linan yarn, coarse compared to silk, stronger than wool, absorbent, ideal for summer clothing, undergarments, tablecloths, and most importantly dyeing. But linen resists dye. It is plant-based, full of cellulose, and less receptive than animal fibers. That's why mordants are essential. That's why linen is often boiled, scoured, soaked, and mordanted for days before touching the dye pot. But once it does, it holds. You run your hand over a finished bolt. Smooth, cool, a soft off-white before dye. Afterward, depending on the color, it can appear muted, understated, subtle. Unlike silk, which gleams, or wool, which glows, dyed linen whispers. And perhaps that is its strength. The linen dyer is not flashy. They don't deal in rare purple or impossible green. They deal in steadiness, in household use, in consistency. 1,000 shirts for 1,000 backs. 1,000 stories, all dyed quietly. One thread at a time. It all begins with a sheep. Not a particularly noble animal, not majestic like a horse, or powerful like an ox. The sheep is practical, docile, shaggy. It grazes the common lands and doesn't ask for much until shearing season, when its thick fleece becomes the lifeblood of cloth making. You find yourself standing beside a pen. Inside, dozens of sheep, restless, bleating, with coats like dirty clouds. Some are speckled with bits of straw, burrs, dried mud. Wool is not a clean fibre in its natural state. It is dense with lanolin grease produced by the sheep's skin, designed to repel water, not invite dye. Shearing begins with a practiced flip. The animal is gently rolled onto its side, its legs held still. The shearer works with hand shears, long blades, like scissors but heavier. With each careful pass, a ribbon of fleece peels away. Not chopped into scraps, but sheared in one long, continuous sheet when done properly. You're told that a good shearer can finish a sheep in under 5 minutes. You take longer, much longer. The sheep wriggles. You cut too deep once. Just a nick, but you feel worse than the animal. A thin line of blood, a small scar, weeks from healing. It's a lesson learned. The fleece is spread out on a table. Now comes sorting. The best wool comes from the shoulders and sides, soft, even, long stapled. Wool from the legs or belly is coarser, shorter, more suited for stuffing or coarse cloth. An experienced sorter can judge a fleece in moments, pulling it into piles, discarding bits too matted or short to use. Then comes scouring. The fleece is soaked in warm water, often mixed with stale urine or fermented plant ash. The goal is to remove the grease, dirt, and debris. This takes time, multiple soaks, multiple rinses. You plunge your hands into the water. It's slick. Smells faintly like wet earth and sour milk. The lanolin begins to lift. You rub the wool gently, pulling out bits of hay. The water darkens with each dip. When the wool is finally clean, it's dried, spread on wooden racks or hung in mesh sacks near the fire. Once dry, it's carded. Carding involves 2 flat paddles covered in wire bristles. You place a tuft of wool on one card and stroke it with the other. The bristles catch and straighten the fibers, aligning them into a soft mass called a rolag, a cigar-shaped bundle ready for spinning. And now the wheel turns. You sit before a spinning wheel, your foot gently pressing the treadle. The wheel turns the spindle. Your fingers feed the wool through pinching, pulling, releasing in rhythm. The wool twists into yarn, fine or thick depending on your touch. It takes practice. Too much tension, and the yarn snaps. Too little, and it unravels. The sound of the wheel is soothing, a soft whirring, like a cat's purr, as the wool becomes thread. Hours pass. By day's end, your basket holds several skeins, twisted loops of spun wool, ready for washing again, then mordanting, and finally dyeing. Wool takes dye better than any fibre. Its natural texture, its absorbency, its origin from living skin, it accepts colour deeply, warmly. Wool dyed in madder glows, like embers. Wool dipped in indigo looks like twilight held in your hands. And to think it all began with that wriggling sheep, a keyed, unimpressive creature. And yet, without it, the dye house would be silent, colourless. Red is a colour of contradictions. It is power and passion, blood and danger, love and martyrdom. In medieval Europe, it is also control because to wear crimson is to be seen, and crimson, true crimson, does not come cheap. It begins not in Europe at all, but thousands of miles away on prickly cactus plants in the highlands of what is now Mexico and Peru. There, tiny insects live. Cochineal. You might miss them at first glance. They appear as specks of white fuzz on the cactus pads. But scrape them off, crush them between your fingers, and your skin is stained deep, impossible red. That red becomes pigment. A dye more intense, more colour-fast than any native red in Europe. And so it is traded, carried by ship, by mule, by cart, packed into barrels, wrapped in linen, guarded fiercely. It arrives in ports like Seville and Genoa, then travels inland to the dye houses of Bruges, Florence, and London. You see it for the first time in a wooden jar. It looks like ground brick, powdered stone. But it is neither. It is life, reduced to dust. To prepare it, the dyer measures it by weight, tiny amounts. A pinch is enough to tint a scarf, a handful for a cloak. It is dissolved in hot water, mixed with alum, sometimes with tin or tartar. The resulting bath is unremarkable at first. But then you lower the wool, and the red blooms. It doesn't stain all at once. It creeps, it builds. The colour deepens with each minute submerged. The longer you wait, the richer it becomes until the wool emerges, gleaming like wine under candlelight. Only the wealthy can afford this. In many towns, laws restrict who may wear it. Sumptuary codes dictate that only nobility may don certain shades of red. Crimson, scarlet, carmine, each has its own tax, its own status. But there are alternatives. Madder root, grown in Europe, produces a serviceable red warmer, more orange. It is cheaper, more available. Some dyers mix madder and cochineal to stretch their supply. Others fake it entirely, using berries or iron to create reddish browns and claiming nobler hues. But those who know, they always know. Cochineal shines differently. Its red is alive. You stir the pot gently, watching the steam curl into the rafters. You think of the journey, from cactus to beetle to barrel to your hand. 1,000 lives, harvested and crushed to make one robe, one banner, one embroidered collar. It is perhaps the most violent of colours, but also the most desired. In the dye house ledger, it is listed separately. It has its own page, its own locked chest. And when it is used, the master watches every step, because red, true red, cannot be undone. You would smell it long before you saw it. The dye house, if you can even call it that, is set near the coast because its secret ingredient lives in the sea. It isn't a plant or mineral, not even an insect. No, Tyrian purple is coaxed from the depths of a mollusk's body, a sea snail, a small one. And to dye even a single tunic requires hundreds. They are called murex, spiny-shelled, sharp, unassuming, collected at low tide by barefoot gatherers with baskets. Each snail must be cracked open, sometimes alive, and a tiny gland extracted. Just one drop of secretion per creature, and it reeks. You approach the workyard, and the smell hits you like a wall. Rotting fish, wet stone, salted flesh left too long in the sun. It clings to everything, clothes, hair, skin. You fight the urge to gag, but the workers don't flinch. They've been here too long. The stench is normal now. You watch as a boy cracks the shell. He does it with a flat stone and a flick of his thumb. The snail's body is slid out, the gland located with practiced fingers. A knife the size of a toothpick slices it free. The secretion is pale at first, milky, translucent, but the magic begins in the air. Oxidation. The liquid changes slowly from white to yellow, from yellow to green, from green to blue, and then, finally, deep, rich purple. Royal purple. The dye is collected in a stone vat and warmed, not boiled. Gentle heat preserves its colour. Linen is too resistant, so wool and silk are preferred. The cloth is dipped and stirred again, but the smell never fades. Even dry, the cloth carries its scent for months, perhaps years. Some say that's how you know it's genuine. The robe of an emperor may look regal, but it smells of death by the sea. And yet, the price is astronomical. So much labour, so many snails, so much time. It is said that a pound of Tyrian dye costs more than its weight in gold. Only the wealthiest can afford it. Kings, priests, high-ranking officials, even they wear it sparingly, borders of cloaks, hems of sleeves. You imagine the absurdity of it. A colour, just a colour, and yet people have died for less. You pick up a strand of wool dipped in the dye. It shines faintly, like dried blood in the sunlight. Its legacy is tangled in politics, trade, violence. A colour stolen from the sea, made beautiful through agony, and now it rests in your hand, still damp, still reeking, still purple. Once the cloth is dyed, once it is dried, folded, and weighed, you might think the work is done. But for many garments, that is only the beginning, because now it must be shaped, stitched, embroidered. The cloth may have taken weeks to prepare, but the needle will spend even longer turning it into meaning. You enter the embroidery room, a quieter corner of the dye house, where older women, retired apprentices, and specialized artisans sit for hours with bent backs and steady hands. The smell here is not of dye, but of beeswax, linen thread, and boiled starch. Each holds a square of cloth in a wooden hoop. The patterns are drawn first with chalk, then ink. Some are simple rows of vines, geometric loops, scalloped borders. Others are extravagant heraldic beasts, birds with jeweled eyes, scenes from scripture or courtly love. The thread is not just wool or linen, it is dyed silk, or, in rare cases, real gold and silver. Gilded thread, spun fine as a hair, wrapped around silk core. It catches the light with every stitch. You are handed a sampler, just a strip of wool with small shapes drawn on it, stars, leaves, initials. You're taught the back stitch first, then the chain stitch, then satin. Each one feels awkward. Your fingers fumble, your eyes blur. But the older woman beside you nods approvingly. You'll learn, she says. The needle moves in rhythm. In, pull, twist, out. Every gesture measured. The tension of the thread matters. Pull too hard, and it puckers. Too soft, and it sags. Embroidery isn't just decoration. It's communication. A merchant's daughter might wear her father's crest stitched across her bodice. A nun might stitch prayers into her veil. A queen's gown could carry entire parables across its train, symbols of virtue, warnings of sin, and every stitch must last. A garment might be washed, passed down, reworn for generations. If the dye fades, the embroidery remains tracing memories in silk. You watch as a square of linen becomes a miniature tapestry, a bird, feathers detailed in 5 shades of blue, a vine curling around a name, a crown with thorns. There is no applause for this work. It is slow, invisible, laborious. But it is also the final voice of the dye house, the thing that says, this cloth mattered. Someone spent time not just to colour it, but to honour it. Needles glint in the morning light, and the thread sings quietly of stories told not in ink, but in stitches. The bucket sits quietly in the corner. It's nothing special to look at, just wood and iron hoops, a little stained around the rim, covered with a damp cloth to keep the smell contained, though that rarely works. Inside is a yellowish liquid, cloudy, warm to the touch. It's human urine, and it's one of the most important substances in the medieval dye house. You've heard the jokes, of course. Apprentice dyers are called piss boys behind their backs. Outsiders wrinkle their noses and mutter. But within these walls, this liquid is treasure, collected daily, from neighbours, public houses, chamber pots. Even families are paid to donate. In some cities, a full jar of morning urine earns a small coin. The best urine, they say, comes from those who drink strong ale and eat salted meat. It's richer, stronger. You're told not to ask too many questions. The purpose is simple ammonia. Urine contains urea, and as it breaks down, it becomes ammonium carbonate. This acts as a scouring agent and, more importantly, a mordant binding dye to fabric and unlocking colour trapped in raw pigments. For woad, it is essential. The leaves are harvested, ground, and left to ferment. Then the cloth is soaked in a vat of stale urine, warm and pungent for hours. It's a process both chemical and ancient, more alchemy than craft. You roll up your sleeves. The vat is warm. The cloth, undyed, pale grey wool, is slowly lowered in. You stir it gently with a paddle. The smell is sharp, like vinegar, and something worse. It sticks to your hands, your sleeves, your hair. But it works. You lift the cloth out after the first soak. It's unchanged. Back in it goes, then out, then beaten, wrung, and soaked again. Only after repeated treatments does it begin to shift pale yellow to green to faint blue. Indigo comes alive only when starved of oxygen. The cloth is removed and exposed to air, and the colour deepens, like a bruise blooming across skin. You hang the cloth on a line. The breeze carries the scent far across the yard, but no one complains. Everyone here understands. The urine vat is part of life, as natural as yeast to bread or smoke to meat. A reminder that beauty doesn't come clean, that even the most regal blue robes began their journey in something as humble as a bucket of piss. You wash your hands in vinegar water. The smell lingers anyway, but you've learned something. Alchemy is real. It just doesn't always look the way you imagined. Before you leave for the day, before the lamps are snuffed and the embers banked, there is one last task. The book must be updated. It rests on a high shelf in the master's office, wrapped in cloth. You untie the binding and lift the cover. The pages are thick, yellowed, edged in ink. The smell is familiar dust, leather, a hint of wax. This is the ledger. It is older than you, older than your teacher. It holds the memory of the dye house, every order, every recipe, every debt and payment, every name. Written in a careful hand, day after day, decade after decade. You find the entry for today. 2 bolts of wool, crimson dyed, delivered to the Tailors' Guild. 1 tunic's worth of linen, failed to hold madder set aside for re-dyeing. A new apprentice, accepted and noted. You write in the margin your own mark, small, slanted, half illegible. But it is enough. It means you were here, that the cloth passed through your hands. The ledger is more than memory. It is law. In cities governed by craft guilds, the dye house is bound by rules. Who may dye what colour, what ingredients are permitted, what penalties follow if a robe fades too soon or a scarf stains the wearer's skin. All of it written, notarized, archived. You read entries from years ago. 3 barrels of cochineal imported, taxed accordingly. A journeyman fined for passing off iron black as true indigo. Complaint lodged by the candle makers over smell from urine yard. Every entry is a story. Not dramatic, not thrilling, but human. The guild visits once a month. A clerk arrives, robes clean, hands ink-stained. He reviews the ledger, compares it to orders, asks questions, inspects bolts of cloth, dips his fingers in vats, notes the temperature of the coals. You've learned not to speak unless asked. The master always passes inspection. He knows the rules better than the clerk. Rules passed down, unwritten and written. How much dye per pound, how many soaks for silk, how to balance ash with alum. These are the rules that hold the dye house together. But the written ones matter most when trouble comes. You remember a story whispered between apprentices. A dyer in another city accused of cutting cochineal with ground brick. A merchant sued. A house closed. The ledger, his own writing, was brought before the court. It condemned him more surely than any witness. So you write carefully. Your pen strokes are slow. The ink smells of oak galls and rusted iron. It scratches across the page with a rhythm that comforts you. The day ends in silence. The dye pots cool. The yard empties. But in the book, the day will always remain. And when someone reads it centuries from now, if they do, they'll know, this was the colour of today. There comes a moment just before the sun disappears when the whole yard stills. The clatter of buckets fades. The steam from the vats no longer rises in urgent spirals. The dye house exhales. You find yourself standing alone beneath the eaves, wool apron damp, fingers stained with madder and chalk. The warmth of the day clings to the bricks, but the air is turning cool. Above, crows cut slow arcs across the sky, black against purple. In the corner, someone rings a bell, just once, a low chime. It's not for show, it's signal. The apprentices stop what they're doing. The journeymen stretch their backs. Even the master appears from the ledger room, arms crossed behind his back. It's time to close. But the dye house doesn't sleep, not fully. Coals must be banked. Vats must be covered. Cloth must be rinsed one final time and hung carefully in the rafters where it will dry overnight in the soft dark, untouched by wind or vermin. You are given a broom. The floor beneath your feet is ash and straw and grit layered with dye powder, threads, and small bits of wool. You sweep it all slowly into a wooden pan. Every motion is methodical, quiet, no one rushes. The sound of bristles on stone is soothing. Outside, someone scrapes boots against the threshold, then unlatches the outer doors. They creak open, not fully, just enough to let in the last of the light. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleats. A child laughs. But within these walls, things move differently. You wash your hands in a shared basin. The water is grey, clouded with remnants of labour. You don't care. The temperature is cool, almost sharp. You dry your hands on a rag that's more whole than cloth. Someone lights a tallow candle in the corner, the flame unsteady. The shadows it casts are long. You've seen them before, those shadows. The shapes of drying wool, curled rags, stacked mordant jars. They feel like old friends now. The room changes when lit this way. It becomes a place not of toil, but of secrets. A kind of hush settles. One of the older apprentices hums softly as she puts away her tools. A minor tune, wordless, old. You don't know the melody, but it fits. You add your own voice, quiet, unsure. No one scolds you. This is allowed, perhaps even welcomed. Evening in the dye house is a slow retreat. Everything is softer now, the smells less sharp, the heat of the vats replaced by the warmth of wool. You sit on the bench and let yourself sag for a moment. Your shoulders ache, your knees complain. But you feel a strange pride, not in what you've made, but in the fact that you were here at all, that you took part in something older than your name, something that will remain, dyed into cloth that might outlive you. You close the shutter gently, you check the bolts, and then, with the final breath of light, you walk out into the quiet street, leaving the dye house to its slumber and its secrets. Most people never look at the building itself. They see the vats, the smoke, the workers. They notice the colour-streaked aprons and the smell that clings to skin. But the walls, the beams, The layout of the place? They don't see those. But you do, because you've spent days, weeks, maybe years within them. And one morning, as you stand in the courtyard with nothing but silence and the first pink haze of dawn, you begin to notice the bones of the building. The dye house wasn't built all at once. Two-number, it grew, piece by piece, like a garment patched together over time. The oldest part is the hearthroom's centre of the compound. Its chimney is wide enough to walk through. Soot clings to its bricks like memory. The floor here is black stone, worn smooth by countless footsteps, hot spills, and the dragging of copper cauldrons. Around the hearth are the vats, each sunk into the floor, each lined with clay or stone, some patched with lead. They are of different ages, different depths. Some hold indigo, others madder, others mysterious blends known only to the master. The rims are stained with rings of dried dye, layered like tree rings. Next to this is the rinsing yard, an open-air square, paved with flagstones that slope gently toward a gutter. Rainwater collects here in barrels. Cloth hangs from tall wooden racks, fluttering like prayer flags in the breeze. The wind here is always damp, scented with wool and wood smoke. Along the northern wall, the storage loft. You climb the ladder and duck your head. Bales of undyed wool, stacks of linen, clay jars sealed with wax, bundles of dried leaves. Everything labelled in spidery script, some so faded, only the master can read them. The loft creaks beneath your feet. You step lightly. Opposite that, the apprentice quarters, a long room with straw pallets, rough blankets, and a single oil lamp that smokes more than it shines. Carved into the walls are initials, some familiar, some ancient. You run your fingers over them. The letters feel like ghosts. Every beam, every nail, every scorch mark tells a story. A dropped torch, a spilled vat, a storm that tore the shutters loose in the year of the frost. You begin to realize the dye house is not just a place of work. It is a body. The hearth is the heart. The vats are organs, the walls are ribs, and you, whether you meant to or not, have become part of it. Another breath in the long rhythm of its life. You lean your head against the cool stone and listen. The dye house breathes. Not all recipes are written in ink. Some are whispered, passed from hand to hand. Some are scratched into scraps of wood. Others are never written down at all, kept close to the chest, recited only in the hush of dawn or the breathless moment after a batch turns just right. You sit on a small stool near the back of the dye house. In front of you, a row of jars. Clay, glass, horn, some labelled, most not. One holds driedlichen, brittle and grey. Another, a pale powder that smells faintly of ash and something else. A third contains what looks like rust but is not. The master gestures to each without speaking. You pick one up. Inside is a small bundle tied in thread. You unfold it and find something dry and fibrous, like bark, but with a smell you can't place. Earthy, animal, maybe both. You're holding ox gall, he says, finally, a substance extracted from a cow's gallbladder, used to bind colour, to break surface tension, to help pigments soak evenly into wool. You place it back gently. Next is madder familiar now. The dried root is reddish-brown, curled like old fingernails. When ground and boiled, it yields that famous crimson, but only with care, only with control. Too hot, and it browns. Too cold, and it weakens. The next jar is labelled simply calcined bone, crushed animal bone, burned to white ash. Mixed with iron salts, it creates a blue-black ink, so deep it seems bottomless. Used more in scriptoriums than dye houses, but kept here all the same, just in case. Then there's cochineal, tiny insects, dried and ground, imported from far lands. Their bodies hold carminic acid, an intense, nearly scarlet red, but it's fragile, sensitive to light. It needs alum, needs patience, and sometimes egg white or wine to stabilize. The last jar is the strangest. It holds dried blood, pig's blood, collected during butchering, then powdered, used in small amounts to deepen browns, or mixed with lye to create a rich, purplish stain. Not used often, but never discarded. You look at all these things. Ingredients no one thinks about when admiring a gown or a tapestry. No one considers the insect, the bone, the bile, the blood. But that's where colour begins. Not in light, but in matter. In the decay of living things. You understand now why dyers are treated with both awe and suspicion. Why they are kept near rivers and away from market squares. Their work is magic but messy, necessary but misunderstood. You run your fingers over the edge of a mixing bowl. There is residue there, a ring of dried dye, flakes of crushed shell, a single crimson thread stuck to the rim. And you think, this is what purple costs. Not just time or money, but strangeness, risk, the knowledge that beauty is made, again and again, from things most people would throw away. You pick up a small spoon, begin to weigh, begin to stir, begin to learn. It begins with a question: who is allowed to wear red? You would think anyone could. After all, red is just a colour, a trick of light and pigment. But in the world of the medieval dye house, red is far more than a hue. It is status, permission, lineage, law. You find the sumptuary chart nailed to a post in the town square. Its lines are strict. Cloth dyed in Tyrian purple, reserved for royalty. Scarlet, made from kermes or cochineal, for nobility, church officials. Madder red, permitted for merchants, guildsmen, successful tradespeople. Black, deep and dense, acceptable for widows, judges, and the wealthy. But not all blacks are equal. Cheap iron black fades to green in sunlight. True black requires layers indigo beneath, tannin atop, with a final iron bath to lock it in. Few can afford that. You remember dyeing a nobleman's cloak once. 5 dips, 12 days. Your fingers stained for weeks. The poor wore what was undyed. Grey wool, faded browns, perhaps a soft yellow from onion skins or chamomile. But even those could mark you yellow for Jews in certain cities, blue for servants, green for musicians or lepers. Every stitch is a signal. And not just colour, but how much of it. A hem in red is acceptable. A full robe? Dangerous. You read of a merchant's daughter once punished for wearing a crimson sash. Confiscated at church. Her father fined. The dyer who sold it? Banned from trading for 6 months. The dye house knows all this. Which colours to reserve. Which to dilute. How to document every sale in the ledger should inspectors arrive. And yet, even here, rebellion creeps in. You've seen apprentices sneak home scrap threads just enough to embroider a cuff, a ribbon, a stitch inside a sleeve no one will ever see. Tiny acts of defiance, of longing, because colour is not just vanity. It is identity. To wear blue when you've only ever known grey is to step briefly into another world. To remind yourself that dignity does not always obey the laws of dye. You sit on a bench and watch the drying yard. Ropes of wool sway in the breeze. Burgundy, ochre, sky blue. Each colour whispering its own place in the world. Each hue a quiet sentence in the long conversation between class, craft, and cloth. And you, hands stained, shoulders tired, are part of that story now. The cloth hangs still now. No wind tonight. Just a velvet hush across the yard, broken only by the drip of water from a gutter and the faint creak of rope stretched under weight. You stand beneath the racks. The day's final batch sways gently overhead, dyed deep blue, almost black, like the sky above just before full dark. It will dry slowly overnight, stiffen, settle, and by morning will be ready for folding, inspection, sale. But for now, it waits. And so do you. There's no rush anymore. The fire has been banked, the vats sealed, the ledger closed with its ribbon bookmark tucked carefully between the pages. Everyone else has gone home. You remain. Looking up, you think of the first day you stepped into the dye house, overwhelmed by heat, by stink, by rules and faces and the maze of stone tubs and steaming pots. You recall the sting in your nose the first time you stirred a vat of woad, the chalky taste of air heavy with lime and smoke. You remember the first time you got it right. Not perfect, but right enough. The colour held, the wool shimmered. The master nodded once, not praise exactly, but something close. Now, you move with confidence, but something else has shifted too. You've come to see the dye house not just as labour or craft, but as a kind of memory machine. Every cloth you help create is a moment preserved. Colours fade, yes. Indigo dims. Madder softens. Even the deepest blacks fray at the edges, especially when worn by hands that toil, bodies that bend and carry. But for a while, they endure. A green cloak passed from father to son, a red sash worn only on feast days, a blue thread sewn into a bridal veil. These are the ways people mark their lives through colour, through the cloth they wear close to the skin, and somewhere, in every thread, is the trace of you, of your hands, your care, your fatigue. You run a finger along a wooden post. It's stained with fingerprints centuries deep. Hands before yours, hands after. You smile, then step back inside. The walls glow with candlelight. The vats, though cold, seem to hum faintly residual heat or memory. You set your apron on its hook. You stretch. You breathe. And as you blow out the final flame, the dye house exhales with you. A silence settles, not empty, but full of story and labour and colour that, even when faded, leaves its mark. You step into the night, a streak of red still under your fingernails, a little blue in your cuffs, and somewhere behind you, the slow breath of a building dreaming in dye.